Hey guys, this is Thomas over here at NurseMoneyTalk.com, and in this video I'm going to talk about 10 must-know nurse interview tips. Now, I've sat in on a lot of nurse interviews, and I've also have been in a lot of nurse interviews, and these are some of the tips that I think will make your entire interview process just that much smoother. Now, before I get into that though, if you're not already subscribed, I want to go ahead and invite you to hit that subscribe button. On this channel, I talk about all things related to nursing student, and of course, nurse life. Let's go ahead and get started. The first tip I want to talk about is about being prepared and not just waiting until that morning to get going. Some of you might think, well, what all do you really have to do beforehand? Well, this could be anything from finding out where the place is, gathering up your resumes, any documents, anything you need. And honestly, it's one of those things where like waiting until the morning, it increases the chances that things just might not go that smooth. So you might say to yourself, well, the interview's at 10, I'll wake up 2 hours early, so at 8 a.m. and I'll try to leave maybe 15 minutes before, and so that'll give me like what, hour and 45 minutes. Well, what if you oversleep a little bit, and so now maybe instead of an hour and 45 minutes you only have 45 minutes. You kind of see what I'm saying? And so I think there's a lot of stress already that comes with interviews, that just waiting until the last minute, it honestly kind of starts setting yourself up for failure. If nothing else, it starts setting yourself up for a potentially very stressful morning. The next thing is to really look at getting a good night's sleep. Now, this is a common advice that's given, even I've given it numerous times for a lot of things, especially having to do with how to best prepare for an exam or something like that. And you kind of start seeing a pattern when it comes to something that's really important, something where you have to be on your best A game or whatever the case may be. Getting a good night's sleep is just that one more thing you can do to help kind of put you in the right spot, help you in terms of being able to think clearer, be more awake, and honestly be the best version of you. The next thing is to really plan on preparing and arriving to the interview site early. I honestly think you should arrive anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes ahead of time. You might even consider arriving even earlier than that, depending on how important the interview is or based on where it's located, especially if you have to travel a great distance to actually get to the interview site. Now, you might be thinking, why plan for such an early interview time? Why plan to arrive so early, especially when I'm probably going to advise you not to actually walk in there or walk in and check in until probably more like 5 or 10 minutes before the start of your interview. And it's all about going back to that first tip that I gave, which is preparing ahead of time. When you plan ahead of time, when you give yourself that much margin on your time, that just puts you in a better spot. It means you don't have to rush as much to get there. So if you plan, for instance, to get to the interview time 30 minutes early, if traffic delays a little bit, then you don't have to be in a rush. If traffic delays by 10, 20 minutes, you're still gonna show up at the right spot early. If you get lost, if you're not 100% sure where the place is at, and you have to drive around for a little bit, maybe even find parking, depending on, if you live in a big city, that still gives you plenty of time. Now, what if everything goes smoothly and you arrive, 25 minutes early? So what? In this day and age with, smartphones and whatnot, most of y'all can keep yourself preoccupied by hours on end with TikTok, YouTube, or whatever the case may be. So arriving early and having to sit for a little bit shouldn't be that big of a deal. But the key thing is that you're not going to be at rush, and you're sure to heck will not make the bad first impression of showing up late. So the fourth thing is to do everything you can to reduce your stress, anxiety, and nervousness for the interview. Pretty much a lot of the things I said beforehand will tie into tip number 4, and a lot of the stuff I'll say after this will tie into number 4. And that is just because nervousness is gonna be probably one of the biggest things that will screw you over during an interview. You know, you could be the best candidate, you could have the best qualifications, you could know more than anybody else, but if you're so nervous, so anxious, so stressed out that you can't or are not able to articulate that, or you're not able to deliver or showcase the best version of you because of that, then that's gonna put you at a significant disadvantage. The next tip is to don't set up an interview time that sets you up for failure. So for instance, if you know you're not really a morning person, or that you generally run late in the morning, like you're just slow to get up, for instance, don't set up an 8 a.m. time. That's like setting that's like setting yourself up for failure. You know, if you know that you have there's a bad traffic in your area or whatever the case may be, then you might want to account for that. You know, if there's really bad morning traffic, so maybe push it a little bit until like 10, push it a little bit later, so that gives you an opportunity to not have to deal with rush hour traffic. If you know that you have another appointment that day, maybe it's not a good idea to stack up appointments, because that means you could potentially be running late to the interview. The point of this is to just be thoughtful about the times you set up for your interview. I'm going to get a lot of pushback on this. I already know it. I've gotten a lot of pushbacks from many nurses on this, and that is, do not dress in scrubs for an interview. And maybe this is just the person who got a business degree inside of me talking. But to me, when they look at formal attire, they're talking about a suit, like slacks or something like that. They're talking about formal attire, not work attire. There's a difference between work attire and formal attire. And I think a lot of nurses will end up saying like, well, it's nurses that are going to be interviewing me, and they understand. Or I've had one nurse say, well, I'm coming straight back from, I'm coming from work and I'm going straight to the interviews. I just I don't believe that makes a good first impression for a lot of reasons. One, a lot of times it's not necessarily nurses that are sitting in the interview. You could be sitting in with a HR professional or a nurse recruiter who may or may not be a nurse. You're potentially sitting in with people who are accustomed to interviewing people who show up in business attire. And so I don't think it's necessarily the best look, especially if you show up in scrubs. Maybe you have a lot of nurses, that they interview that do show up in scrubs. And then you have the one that shows up in professional attire. And so I think that nurse, or that individual, that man, woman, whatever, is the one who's going to stick out as somebody who showed up in the attire that they're accustomed to. So even if you have a nurse manager, or you have an actual nurse who's doing this, like, keep in mind, a lot of times nurse managers, they're wearing business attire. So you don't know if this is somebody who has grown accustomed to seeing other people who show up in a business, showing up in a business attire. I think business attire that it conveys a different message than showing up in scrubs. And so these are just all the things, like, if nothing else, like, it is my firm belief that even if a scrub, like wearing scrubs, won't necessarily hurt you per se for an interview, I do believe dressing in business attire will help you for that interview, especially in terms of sticking out in a positive way to those who are doing the interview. Number 7 is to know your resume and make sure to bring a copy with you. I feel like this goes without saying. You should know what you put in your resume, what you filled out in the application, and what you're saying should be consistent with what your resume says. And also, even though most interviewers are probably already going to have your resume there. They're probably already going to have it. I think you bringing a copy with you and then just start passing it out, I think it's a good look. You have to keep in mind for an interview, a lot of times what you're doing is just trying to make a good impression. If they're bringing you in for an interview, chances are they're already probably interested in hiring you, or now they're just trying to look for reasons to not give you the job. At least that's how I generally look at these interviews, because you got to remember, like, for most of these interviews, especially looking at when you're applying, and if you know like what the ATS is, or applicant tracking system or whatever, that has already weeded out a lot of applicants who aren't good fits right out of the gate. And so once somebody lays eyes on your application and they consider, well, let's go ahead and bring them in for an interview, they're already interested. So your goal is to just help convince them, like, yep, you made the right choice. I am it. Number 8 is to really study some common nursing interview questions and answers. Now, on NurseMoneyTalk.com, we have several articles on kind of like what some common nursing interviews, like question and answers for like different kind of like nursing specialties. Like right now, I think we have like oncology, nursing, ICU, and a couple of others, kind of slowly kind of building that up. If there's actually one that you're interested and you'd like to see on there, make sure you drop a comment in the comment section. Now for this, some people might stress on kind of like these whole like question and answer things. I actually try not to stress on this too much for a couple of reasons. One, I think there's kind of like very common questions you're gonna get on there, and that's kind of like what we try to focus on kind of like the question and answers articles that we have. I'll put a link to one in the descriptions below. And so generally, like, you can kind of get an idea of what you're probably going to be asked. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you are pretty good at like thinking on your feet, this is gonna come probably a lot easier for you than somebody who isn't. And so if you're somebody who you're not all that good on kind of like thinking on your feet, then you might want to really consider kind of studying some of these questions and answers just a little bit more. But honestly, don't try to memorize questions or memorize answers, because it's just because I think then when you don't get one that sounds exactly like the question that you have memorized, I think all that's going to do is just kind of throw you off. So just kind of take a look at it and just be familiar at common questions and have an idea. So for instance, like in our answers, like we kind of give you almost very kind of like generic ideas, because the point is almost kind of like generic answers to the questions. So the point is to kind of have a rough idea of what you're going to answer, and then just kind of tailor that, because sometimes the interviewer might ask you like might throw like a curveball in there, and so you don't really want to get stuck with a memorized answer that doesn't quite fit the question. The next one is to make sure to only say kind things about your current and or former employers. You might be asked about, and you probably will be asked to a certain extent about what your duties were and about your previous employers. It's just not a good look to sit there and bash your current or former employers. It makes you kind of seem petty. And it really does give the wrong impression to to somebody who potentially could be your future employer. And so one example that I had on here in the in kind of like the article for this video, and I'll put that in the descriptions below, of how to answer a question like this. Like the interviewer asked you, what made you decide to leave your current employer? So you could say something like, I've been at my current employer for 4 years and I have had the pleasure of working with some amazing nurses and managers. At this point, I'm looking for some new challenges in my career. This position is appealing to me because it allows me to be able to take care of more acute patients and be able to help Memorial Hospital accomplish its mission of providing exceptional patient care. In this situation, they don't need to know that that it was a bad unit or it was a bad organization. Here's the thing though, because if it's word gets out, in terms of like the nursing community and even like healthcare community as a whole. So if a hospital is bad, if an organization's bad, if a department is crap, there's a good chance that your new employer already knows that. There's a good chance that somebody else had already made the bad impression of bashing that employer. So you don't need to do that. You just need to give a good response that answers the question and doesn't bash anybody. And so what you'll notice about this particular question is that, or this particular answer, is that you answer the question without bashing the previous employer, while you're putting an emphasis on almost like what you can provide to them if you're hired. And so you put the focus away from my employer was bad to like, I'm a good nurse, I did X, Y, and Z, I'm looking to expand my career, do X, Y, and Z, and I can bring those skill sets to your facility. The last thing I want to bring up is to just make sure to send a thank you note, email, in essence, follow up, be gracious for them giving you the opportunity to interview for the position. And the key thing with this is it shows gratitude. Because you're being gracious, you're not being entitled like you deserve the job. And people love gratitude. But that's one part of it. The big thing though is that it's a way for you to kind of sort of follow up, while at the same time making sure to bring them back, make sure to bring yourself back to their attention, back to the forefront. Like, oh, hey, I interviewed for this position and I'm following back up. And a lot of times, like, it's, you got to remember, you got to think like it's the little things. Like with interviews, sometimes it's the little things that you do that can make the biggest impact, especially if it's something that's good that other people are not generally doing. I'm not saying that, that if you are like a horrible candidate, that this is what's going to propel you to being the candidate for the job. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, if it's on one way to look at it is that if it's like a point system, every little thing that you do almost kind of like adds points to your bucket. And for situations where, like let's say they were kind of like on a toss-up, like it was you and another candidate, and they're kind of trying to almost on the fence of like, well, who do we give for the job? You doing that one extra thing could be the difference between your name kind of getting pushed up a little bit over the other person. But yeah, that's all I've got. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment sections below. If you found this video helpful, would really appreciate the thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you very soon in that next video.